speaking about what the Aguda is doing from 1975 to this day. Let me put it in very, very bluntly. The only organization in the Middle East that is a genuine force for LGBT rights, including those of the Arabs, is the Aguda from 1975. Israel changed its mandatory British law in 1988, and that took a few years of struggling by the Aguda to change it. And since 1988, gays are completely equal, or almost completely. There were a few bumps on the road that we still had to, get in line after 1988. In 1993, LGBTQ people started serving equally in the military, in the Israeli military. And I'm proud to say that most of the intelligence corps in the IDF is queer, which is something that is unique to the state of Israel. From what I understand, there aren't a lot of militaries over the world that accept LGBTQ people as equals completely, and sometimes even pay for medical treatments for transgender people, etc., etc. This is something that Israel is unique by. Just for the sake of letting you know, the United States stopped its "don't ask, don't tell" policy only in 2011 or 12. 1993 is when things were different with us. Every year, the Aguda takes in from 150 to 500 LGBTQ people from the West Bank, Gaza, and Arab states around us. Depends on the year. In the year of the civil war in Syria, there were more from Syria, and sometimes even Iranian refugees escaping death sentence or gender reassignment as punishment, which is something customary in Iran. Some of them escaped through Jordan to us, because life in Israel for an LGBTQ person is, well, equal, mainly. If you're a refugee, it's a little more complex, of course, but in general, the rights are completely equal. Israel is a democratic state. Even if you've got grievance with the government, which I do, you get to say them publicly and speak your mind, and nobody's gonna come after you for that. I'm sitting here in Haifa, and my entire neighborhood is getting ready for whatever Hezbollah has in its mind for us. I hope they won't interrupt us, because I hear that that they evacuated more and more northern parts of Israel today due to the attacks from Hezbollah. I just want to say that the misunderstanding in Europe regarding the situation in which LGBTQ Arabs, non-Israeli, live by is being misused, and created the Queers for Palestine movement and made it stronger, despite the fact that Queers for Palestine is like cows for McDonald's or chickens for KFC, because in Palestine, you can't be openly queer. You can't be. You're afraid of your own family, as well as the government, as well as terrorist organizations. Depends on where, but that's the situation. In Gaza, public beheading and public torture of LGBTQ people is a common thing. The first time the pride flag, the 6 colors flag, was risen in Gaza, it was done by, well, queer soldiers who came in this war, in the beginning of this war. The Hamas isn't pro-queers. You can't be queer and stay alive in Gaza. That's not the way it goes. In order to be queer and stay alive, you escape to Israel. And Israel, from 1951, does not send any man, any refugee, to his death. In other words, you can stay in Israel if that's your condition. And me personally hosted in my own home, sometimes 10 people that had no other place to go. Now they actually have government refuge facilities, and they get a lot of help, unlike they did in the early 2000s. So they no longer have to stay with volunteers, but nonetheless, they get medical treatment, usually from torture they have suffered either from their family, relatives, or terrorist organizations. They get medical treatment here by doctors. It's completely free. And they get to start a life anywhere they'd like. Anywhere they'd like. These people usually don't stay in Israel, not because Israel isn't accepting them, but because their families are a threat to their lives. They usually choose to move elsewhere where they'd be far away from anyone finding out where they are. Where now in the West Bank, the situation is slightly better, but only slightly. The West Bank doesn't prohibit, there is no law saying that you can't have gay sex, but if your family hears about it, you might be murdered quietly. It's not a public scene as it is in Gaza, but you might, your relatives might try to take vengeance for hurting the family's honor. They're called honor killings. The same risk, by the way, exists for women who are not happy with their marriage and started seeing someone else. If you're cheating on your husband, you might be a subject to honor killings. And same goes for LGBTQ people. Me, myself, I was foreign relations director at the Aguda, and I'm a straight woman who found out she was straight during her job in the Aguda. But when I told my boss, Mike Hamel, may he rest in peace, look, I think I'm into just men, I'm not into women anymore. He said, well, we don't discriminate against straight people. You're more than welcome to stay in your job, everything's fine. This attitude does not exist in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, in Jordan, and especially not in Iran. All these countries I've just mentioned still practice torture and women's mutilation for lesbians. In Palestine, if you were raped, a woman was raped. Until 1918, she had to, by law, marry her rapist. We're talking about a society that lives by almost medieval rules. This is very hard for Europeans to understand because it is so culturally different from the Western culture. It is a world apart. There's a world apart between the way Islam is practiced in some places in the Middle East and the way modern thinking is. And it's true regarding women, and it's true regarding LGBTQ, and it's true regarding a lot of other issues, as well as education. These differences are being used by, well, terrorists to try and manipulate the European public into believing that the problem is Israel. The problem isn't Israel. The Arab world would have been the same even if we didn't exist. The Arab world would not accept LGBTQ people even if we didn't exist. It's something that's been there for centuries, even thousands of years, and they are still practicing it just as they practice women's mutilation. In Egypt, it's considered good manners to give it to your daughter. I'm not kidding, by the way. This is an honest thing. In Iran, it became one of the punishments given to lesbians lately by the new president. He said he's going to abolish the one of the Ayatollah's police and all that. He didn't. He actually made it worse. And now they're searching for lesbians to mutilate. I'm not kidding. That's the latest news we got from Iran regarding LGBTQ rights. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a huge gap between the reality of an LGBTQ person living in the Arab sections of the Middle East and living in Israel. Because Arab Israelis only have to fear one thing: their families. Any gay man, woman, or transgender that came out to his parents is afraid of his family. But there is no death threat over their heads, usually. That's very, very rare. They would disown you, they would stay away from you, they would maybe kick you out of the house, but there will be no, you will stay alive. There was an exception, there are exceptions to this over the years, but in Israel, it is so uncommon. It became very, very rare to hear such horrible news, thank God. But in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, I'll just tell you a little story. We were at the United States after I've given the same talk at Senate and Congress. We had a meeting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the State Department. And they asked me, we were asking for help with Tel Aviv Gay Vibe and the Tel Aviv Pride Parade, et cetera, and said it was the only Pride Parade in the Middle East. And the guys at the State Department said, but we're giving money to Lebanon for promoting a Pride Parade there. And we started laughing because I can't see a Pride Parade marching through Beirut while Nasrallah is still alive. That's not how it can't be. It simply can't be. Lebanon is not a place that LGBTQ people are safe in. And we told them, please check where the money is going to, because it's not going to promoting gay rights in Lebanon, I can assure you. How do we know this? Lebanese queers escaped to Israel. They have been escaping to Israel since 1975. Small amounts of people manage to, but they still do. Queers in the Middle East have a hard time, except in Israel. In Israel, they're allowed to adopt, lesbians are allowed to adopt each other's children, men are allowed to have a surrogate, to have their children. The gay families are recognized by every institution in the country. Gays who serve in the militaries and, God forbid, one of the partners gets killed are accepted as widowers of war and get all the rights regarding it. All that has changed in Israel since 1988 to this day. I'm not saying it's perfect. Israel still doesn't recognize civil marriages in general, not just when it comes to LGBTQ in general, but it does recognize gays as life partners. There's a different statute for queers as well as people who don't want to get married religiously. There are a lot of couples like that in the straight community as well, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people don't feel that they want a religious marriage, so they marry in different ways by legal documents, etc. And it's still recognized by the state of Israel as a domestic partnership. It's called a domestic partnership. And it's completely equal between straights and queers. There's no difference. Absolutely none. I'm proud to say I worked on it for many, many years. In the religious, ultra-religious society, of course, things are slightly more complex. But again, every society in Israel does not kill queers. There is no such thing. If it does, let me put it this way, you're more likely to be killed by a terrorist than to be killed by your own family as a queer person in Israel. Just saying. And anywhere else in the Middle East, it's not like that. And I'm afraid that Europe has unknowingly cooperated with terrorist propaganda, parts of Europe, terrorist propaganda, trying to seem progressive and accepting to Islam values, etc., etc. Part of their values is torturing and killing queers. It's a part of their culture and has been for centuries. If anybody has a question, now is the time to ask it. Any questions? In 1996, Mubarak wanted to change it. He found it atrocious that this is happening to women in his country. And in 2006, they made sure there is a ban, but it's not enforced properly. It's not enforced properly yet. I hope they will. I really hope they will. Because Egypt is one of the greatest leaders of the Arab world. Truly, it's one of the strongest countries who has a lot of influence over the entire Middle East. I sincerely hope they'll change that policy as soon as possible. But it is still a very common, it's called chitan. It is still a very common ceremony done to really young children. If you have a question, yes, I'd love to answer it. Well, you're going to have a lot of fun. Tel Aviv is basically gay nowadays. Every time you see a cute man, he's apparently gay, unfortunately for me. And they all look so good because they all work out. And anyway, Tel Aviv is basically the freedom capital of the Middle East. And the Tel Aviv Pride Parade has been, except for this year, because we've suffered so many losses and where we have so many people who are still in Hamas, in the Hamas tunnels, or so many hostages. So this year, the Pride was a little tinier and a little quieter. But usually the Tel Aviv Pride Parade is the best party in the Middle East. And the community is very vivid, very active. very open to many binary subjects, etc. It's a full life. It has both a church, a synagogue, and a mosque all together. It's pretty amazing. It's peace in the Middle East in one city. And it's all around being free, queer, and clear, they call it. And I'm sure you're going to love it. They have everything from youth groups to old age groups for, you know, the elderly LGBT who still remember times that were darker, like me. The viajot, we call them, like me. But Tel Aviv nowadays is not only open for gays, you'll meet your husband. It's not even a question. If you don't have one, you'll get one. A Jewish husband, preferably a former officer, you know. And the Aguda is mainly a lobbying organization nowadays. It lobbies in the Knesset for every subject that the ultra-religious have a problem with. Sometimes Israel is not perfect, but it is a democratic state, and therefore you could fight for your rights and get them. If there's a problem at some city hall or, you know, not everywhere is as open as Tel Aviv. I live in Haifa. Haifa is as open as Tel Aviv. But the guys are cuter in Tel Aviv. I'm just saying, much cuter. And if you need my help, please contact me after this, and I will try to do my best to help you. I'm no longer with the Aguda. I got sick. I have multiple sclerosis. But I still have very strong connections in the gay community in Israel. Representing them for 20 years has done its fair share. You will encounter in Tel Aviv some of the refugees I was referring to. There are still 150 refugees coming from the West Bank and Gaza every year, most of them very young. Most of them are under 18 or under 20. And their families are a threat to them, sometimes more than even anything else, more than the governments they escaped from. The Palestinian Authority does not put gays in prison or anything like that, but it allows the families to persecute them, unfortunately. The police is not doing anything about that. So they escaped to Tel Aviv. Some of them are pretty cute. And most of them get treated and some kind of trauma, therapy, etc., by the Aguda, by volunteers in the Aguda. It's completely free. Doing the same thing from 1975, you do get, you know, a lot of volunteers. Some of them even finish their PhDs in psychology. What I'm going to talk about now is the status of lesbians in the Arab world, which is slightly different. The Palestinian Authority, for instance, is not as harsh as some of the families are. The Egyptian authorities don't even recognize the fact that lesbians are not a problem to them, let me put it this way. In the Jordanians too. However, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran, it is a crime to be either gay or lesbian still to this day. And in Iran, the situation is the worst there is. They mutilate lesbians and forced sex changes operations on men, gay men. It's still all these people, the LGBT activists in their countries, are trying quietly to help them escape to Israel in order to avoid a death sentence, a sex change operation, or mutilation. I'm not saying they're successful at all times, but some of the times. And Israel welcomes them, treats them, and helps them out to escape their families. Again, this is something that Europeans don't get. The main threat to gay Muslims, especially Muslims, in the Palestinian Authority, in Gaza, in anywhere in the Arab world, except for maybe Jordan, is their own families. And the term honor killings is not something I invented. It happens every day in these countries. Unfortunately, the liberal education in these countries has been denied of the population for many, many years. And they don't share the same liberal values as we do regarding equality, regarding civil rights, regarding human rights, especially when it comes to LGBT. I'm sorry to say this. I encountered people who escaped Gaza, and by people, I mean children, 15, 16-year-olds who escaped the monsters of Hamas and their tortures, which are horrendous, mortifying, and got here somehow, got to Tel Aviv somehow, and got treated by Israeli doctors. Some of them had needed surgeries to repair what the Hamas had ruptured or dislocated. And let me tell you this, we knew they were monsters well before 7th of October, us in the gay community, because we've encountered the victims since 2006 when they took over. Since 2006, if a gay man is found in Gaza, he is given by his family to Hamas to be tortured and killed. And some of these people, brave people who managed to escape, one of them 15 years old, Israeli doctors had to remove an iron stick they stuck in his rectum, and a hot iron stick. And these are the kind of monsters we're talking about. And they are monsters. I'm not saying all Gazans are like that, but the society is very religious and very backwards when it comes to women's rights and LGBT rights. It's not as bad as it is in Iran, but it's not far away from it. The atrocities they have committed to LGBTQ people reminded me many, many times of ISIS. And only last year, Ahmed Abu Murakia from Hebron was beheaded, and his body was dismantled just for being gay. And it was done by Hamas or Jihad Islami. We still don't know. The investigation is ongoing. By the way, the Palestinian authorities, of course, denied all connections to it and are trying to find the people who did that to him. He escaped to Israel from his own family, and his family found his head in the trash can near their house. How horrible. And this happened only last year. He was 21 years old. I can send, if any of you want it, I can send you the link to the article about him. But my point is, the Arab world does not share the values Europe has when it comes to equality, to civil rights, to human rights, especially when it comes to gays and women. And in the Arab-Israeli society, they are way more progressive. And there's even shelters for teenagers who need housing after their families throw them out of the house, which is something that happens less and less in the Jewish sector of Israel, but still happens in the Arab world. But again, they don't fear death. That is the difference between Arab Israelis and Palestinian. Arab Israelis, queers from Israel, who are Muslim or Arab, and queers from Palestine don't share the same fear of death by a family. That is something that is unique to anyone living outside of Israel. And I'm sorry to say that Hamas is promoting false propaganda on the subject, but they are. And I'm here to correct that. Any more questions? Anything? The Hamas propaganda says that queers, they initiated in the US the BDS movement and Queers for Palestine, and they try to look like they are progressive and accepting to the gay community outside of Gaza. In their PR outside of, well, they're lying. They're flat out lying. Because inside of Gaza, if you're gay, you're likely to be killed after severe torture. And this is something they're trying to hide from the public, especially the American public, by the way. This is something they're trying to hide, and they're simply lying. I have no other word, because they are trying to invoke the progressive part of the United States as well as Europe to accept the idea that Israel is the problem. No, terrorists are the problem. Terrorists are the problem of the Middle East, not just in Israel, it's true about anywhere. And terrorists are the problem. And fundamentalists are the problem. And Islam fundamentalists to Islam are the same way the KKK is to the church. So we're not talking about all Muslims, not at all. We're talking about a minority that is very, very extreme, extremely violent, and isn't the image of Islam. I want to make really clear that I'm not anti-Muslims. I'm anti-fundamentalists, which is something completely different. Between Muslims and Muslim fundamentalists, there's a world of difference. It's a completely different religion. How shall I put this? Muslims are, most of them are good and kind people who want to live in peace. Fundamentalists want war and an ongoing war, and they use the term jihad to a Muslim friend of mine said, jihad is learning, is going through your BA or MA. Jihad is fighting the forces within you that say, stay at home, don't do anything, just be idle, and, you know, it's pushing yourself into succeeding. Jihad is not a religious war the way the extremists are using it. And it's a distortion of what Islam is saying, a complete distortion. And as I've said, Muslim fundamentalists to Muslims are the same as the KKK is to the church, or, well, that's the only the Inquisition to the church today. It's completely different. And I'm very pro-Arab Israelis and very pro-Muslim Israelis and Christians. And it's just not the same thing. And we'll get to your question in a moment. My best friend when I was 17 died of AIDS. He was an Arab Israeli from Abu Ghosh, Christian. And he died of AIDS in Hadassah Har HaTzofim. His family was barely there. And I got to the gay community to prevent that from happening to anyone else ever again. And I've had some success. Some I succeeded, some not. Yes, let's hear the question, please. Since the Aguda exists from 1975, the Arab world has heard, the Arab LGBTQ world has heard the word Aguda from 1975, therefore they know it. I can't say what was happening in the years 75 to 88 because I wasn't there. And but from 93, I've heard stories about how Lebanese people escaped through the borders with the help of the IDF and sometimes Shin Bet to get to Tel Aviv. While we opened the Syrian border in the time of the civil war and ISIS, a lot of women, children, and LGBTQ people escaped to us. That was about 1,000 people that we took in. And yes, we don't have diplomatic relations with them, but we do. We're Jews. We value life. It's a Jewish state. We value life. We are humanitarians at first. And when a refugee who's wounded is asking for our help, we usually don't deny them. And by usually, I mean always. It's actually the law. And we also took in quite a few LGBTQ people from Sudan, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, and from Egypt. By the way, in Egypt, again, the situation is slightly better because, again, the government doesn't persecute you, but your family might. I don't think there were any refugees from Egypt in the last 7 years or 10 years, maybe, but they were in the past. Jordan is where Jordanians, LGBTQ Jordanians, help Iranian people escape to our borders. And this is all very hush-hush. This is done by ways that are not ways, actually. The LGBTQ community in Jordan is undercover, but it exists. And I'm saying undercover mainly due to the fear of the families, not fear of the government. Egypt and Jordan are the only two states in the Middle East that you're not supposed to be afraid of the government itself. Palestine depends, because the police are persecuting, I'm afraid to say, gays who are openly gay in Palestine. And some of them even give the names to terrorist organizations. Again, this is just from what I hear from activists on the ground. How do they escape? I call it, well, it's an underground. they're doing it underground, except for when we opened the border to Syria and they came directly. It's all done in ways that are not exactly common ways, through the help of friends from the Israeli gay community, such as myself. We also sent medication and condoms and lube to Gaza many, many times in order for terrorists not to know who is in need of those things. I mean cocktail, and I mean PrEP, the prevention for AIDS medication. We send them to Arab countries in ways that were not ways, through activists on the ground. And we made sure that any gay man who wants to have sex doesn't have to go through a pharmacy that belongs to Hamas to do so. This is a really sad thing. Let's start with the Arab world, with the Arab world, and then go on to the Israelis. We don't get any more refugees from Gaza. That means most of them are dead. Most of them. We do get refugees from the West Bank. That still exists. So actually more than we used to. Some refugees came from Lebanon about 2 weeks ago. I've heard it yesterday from the guy responsible for the Arab project in the Aguda, that approximately 10 people came from Lebanon, because Hezbollah is going berserk there, and threatened them, and they were afraid they're going to execute them, so they escaped here. And they're currently in Israeli hospitals. I can't tell you anymore due to their security. We didn't get anyone from Iran since the attack, since Iran attacked us. But I'm sure we'll hear soon, because of the change of the laws in Iran, I'm sure we'll hear soon from our Jordanian friends that they have a few gifts for us. That's how we call them on the a gift. They are gifts. And that's the Arab world. As for the Israelis, the gay community suffered many, many losses. A lot of the gay and lesbian men and women are combat soldiers, and some of them were killed. Some of them were killed by Hamas terrorists. On October 7th, in the Nova Party, some of the people that the Hamas butchered were LGBTQ, of course. It was a party that was open for all, and some of these people in that music festival were, of course, gay or queer or something. So the reason the Pride in Tel Aviv was minor this year was the fact that everybody's a little shocked and in mourning, because we lost a lot of people. We really did. Some of my friends who were fighting in Gaza, they're officers, and they ran. I don't know if you know this, but in the Israeli military, the commander runs first. The term is acharai, after me. And some of these people were commanders, and they got killed. Lesbians too, by the way. One of the tankists, the women tankists on October 7th, is a gay woman. And she was one of the first forces to respond to the attack. And they came on with their tanks and saved entire villages. Some of them are real heroes. And it was the first time in history women were a part of fighting in tanks. I mean, there is no other occasion in history where women tankists were a part of active fighting except for October 7th and since. We're proud of our heroes. It's very hard to answer because I was never a terrorist, so I don't know what they're thinking in that sense. But I can tell you that in the Arab world, raping men was always one of the techniques used to torture all sorts of hostages. Also, in the Nova Festival, women were raped as well. It's a method of torture to them. And for the first part of your question regarding whether gays, LGBTQ people who work at the Israeli intelligence institution have helped refugees, LGBTQ refugees from the Middle East enter Israel, I can't answer that for security reasons, but you understand. Of course it did, but I can't say that officially. Nor are we're not publishing all of this due to the fact that we are afraid for their lives. These people escaped not only their governments, but their families, and their families have relatives here because Israel is very integrated, and their families have relatives here. So the fear is very genuine. That's why I'm not telling you names and I'm not telling you where they are or which hospital, because these people are still in danger. The Israeli soldiers and Shin Bet people are not in any danger due to their help. They did it with the acceptance of the authorities and everything's fine. Those who remained in danger, we helped them out. We helped them to find asylum in Canada, in the US, in certain places in Europe, but we helped them escape from their own families. This is something that usually Europeans and Americans don't understand. They're not just escaping the government or the terrorist organization, they're escaping their own families because of honor killings, which is still something that takes place every day for LGBTQ people, plus women. Women, it's a little more rare, quite frankly. LGBTQ people every day. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And it is personally, because of my grandmother, a privilege to speak to Heidelberg audience. Really, a real pleasure for me. She would have been proud. By the way, she was supposed to be a gynecologist. Hitler kicked all the Jews out of the universities, and then she became a midwife and worked here in Emet Israel to deliver babies, Arab, Muslims, Christians. She didn't care. If a woman needed help, she helped.